quickly.
Yes.
If you can ensure your cell phones are off or on silent, and council members ensure your microphones are turned on.
You have to go.
What's up, baby?
Live.
All right, today is Monday, May 13th, 2024. This is a regular legislative meeting of Barberton City Council. But before we begin the regular legislative meeting, we do have individual committee meetings this evening. And we will start with City Properties, Parks, and Recreation with Mr. Cheatham.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'd like to bring the City Properties, Parks, and Recreation Committee to order. Today is May 13, 2024. The time now is 6 p.m. And we are in council chambers. All members of my committee are present, including myself as chair, Rebecca Gerhardt, Jennifer Hager, and Justin Greer. All other council members and others, as noted on my sheet, we have nothing at this time. However, I would like to ask the mayor for an update on College Park.
Yes, so College Park, the equipment has been installed. Some new mulch has been installed around the play equipment as well. We are still getting pricing on fencing and some of the other things that we want to do to the park there to make it more user-friendly and usable. So we're still getting those quotes, and then we'll be moving forward with that through the Parks Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
But the equipment, if you haven't seen it, there's a lot more equipment there than what was there before, and it looks really, really good. And it's not made of any type of plastic, so the likelihood of it burning is almost none. So that's important to note.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right. Are there any discussion from committee? From the body? The gallery? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
I'll second.
All right. This meeting is now adjourned at 6:02 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Cheatham. Next up is Public Welfare and Safety with Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'd like to bring the Public Welfare and Safety Committee to order. It's Monday, May the 13th. We are in council chambers. The time is 6:02 p.m. All members of my committee are present, including myself as chair, Mr. Cheatham, Ms. Gerhardt, and Mr. Greer. All other council members and others are noted on my sheet. We have one request for legislation from Chief Morber of the Police Department. It's an ordinance to authorize the Director of Finance to enter into a contract with Statewide Ford for the purchase of 2 fully outfitted Ford Police Interceptor utility vehicles for the amount of $129,876. Emergency wording is requested. Any comments? Can I get a motion to call for it?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right. We have no pending legislation. Miscellaneous. Ms. Eisman. She would like to speak about National Police Week, which is this week.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. So as the safety director and as a daughter of a retired Barberton police sergeant, I wanted to let everyone know that we have entered into National Police Week. I am proud to honor the bravery, dedication, and sacrifice of the law enforcement officers who work to keep our community safe. Police Week is a chance to recognize the brave men and women of policing profession who risk their lives every day to keep others safe, while also honoring the fallen with gratitude for their service and sacrifice. The families, agencies, and communities of these officers will always remain in our hearts. In 2024, 282 names will be added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, commemorating officers killed in the United States. Those 282 names represent agencies, communities, and families from across the country affected by the loss of their own. The stakes are high, the risks are real. Just yesterday, a Columbus police officer was shot, arresting an active shooter. And as we have all seen, we are now honoring the ultimate sacrifice of Euclid police officer Jacob Durbin, who was killed this weekend while protecting his community. He went to work, he answered a call, he didn't go home. It is heartbreaking and just so tragic. We are so blessed to have the women and men of the Barberton Police Department look after us and keep us safe daily. They serve quietly and professionally, not seeking attention or praise. They work so hard and do so much good. We need to remember that they are always there, vigilant and watchful, keeping us protected from those who take advantage and hurt us. Our freedoms and way of life are a product of the blanket of safety and service they provide to our community. This week, please join us in reflection and remembrance of those who have taken from us in service and of their communities. We will forever be thankful for their courage, bravery, and heroism. To the Barberton police officers of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, thank you for your service and all that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I have a gentleman here, Mr. Morrison, that would like to speak about some safety concerns regarding the Worcester Road West project that's coming up, starting next Monday. Do you want to step up?
We had multiple concerns. We have a salon down on Worcester Road, my wife and I, and there are, just to let you know, there's 8 other businesses in there. All the stylists have their own business, so they've all voiced concerns about just the extent of the project. They're closing down eastbound, I guess it's eastbound, right? That's closing for a year, or 510 days, year and a half. Just in what the traffic pattern is going to do to business safety, everything. I know we kind of got mixed in with the safety, but, and I talked to Todd today for a while. He kind of explained everything very well. I appreciate that. But just as far as going forward, like we didn't know it was going to be shut down eastbound, I think. And I think that was new. I mean, obviously we knew the construction project was going on.
Right.
It's going on. Everybody knows that and appreciates it and everything else. But to shut the road down eastbound for that long of a period of time and changing the traffic patterns and everything, and now everybody's being routed quite a long way around. I think it's Norton Avenue down to Worcester Road. I always call it past the Indian and then down back the other way. Seems extensive, so I don't know if, like I said, we just wanted to voice our concerns for the other 8 businesses inside of our place as well as ours. And if there's a way to mitigate some of that going forward, maybe know about it sooner too for us, so we can, because I mean, if we were able to, I think you found out from a customer, really, that's seen the sign. I mean, and then she's been getting calls and complaints and from customers and stylists and stuff like that. So it's just voicing a concern really about the whole project. Not that it doesn't need done, or not that we're complaining
Right.
it's being done at all, because we appreciate it. But at the same time, is there something we can do going forward? Different traffic for, I think it was explained to me, the detours in Route 4, like semis and bigger trucks and stuff like that too. It has to make sense for everybody. If there's something that can be done for smaller vehicles maybe, or some kind of different detour setup, I don't know. I mean, it's just, and I think you just mentioned mitigating it when they're in certain areas and stuff like that. So we just wanted to kind of voice that. And I think, was there anything else you were thinking? Or? No? Okay. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't know if that's possible, and I know there's meetings being held in other areas with different road construction and stuff. I don't know if that can be done to let everybody know what's going on down Worcester Road too. I don't know if it has been done. I don't know. I know like Taylor Road, there's been meetings in certain areas, and that's just from my in-laws, so I don't know. what's the best form of communication we can get
Okay.
going forward.
Mr. Tedeki, do you have anything? Mr. Shreve, anything that you can add to it?
Your concern is valid, that we want to continue to be the bridge, be the liaison between ODOT, the contractor, businesses, the people traveling through our town. When you have questions, please ask council, ask us. We'd like to continue to, as we get the information, we want to continue to share it. And actually, hot off the press, I know more about State Street, that when given the opportunity tonight, I was going to at least bring in some new information about that. So yes, we want to continue to do a better job to come out and talk to the businesses as we learn when the detours are set up, some of the new impacts, when they'll close it for the train crossing, because we don't know when that'll be, but it'll happen for 5 days at some point in the next 2 years. So we want to help keep that information moving forward. And if you've got better forms of communication with some of the area businesses, we'd be happy to listen to some of that. The next couple of days, we're trying to knock on doors. We're going to try and put a letter out with the latest information we have. But do know it's construction. Things change, weather patterns change, things get shifted on certain days. So a lot of the generalizations of the flow of construction is still contractor ODOT dependent. That as we learn, we'll try and get the word out.
Okay. And then I know I've reached out to Todd a couple times, and he supplied us with great information. I appreciate it. So each time he helped us out. So yeah, I think that's
Great.
everything.
You got anything to add, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of concern, a lot of questions. Most people are very, very supportive of the project. They know it needs to be done. We realize that with progress comes inconvenience. Obviously, on this stretch, this project is a very long stretch, and you have a multitude of different sized businesses. Some are walk-in traffic clients. Some are, they're getting deliveries of food or beer because it's a restaurant or bar. You've got large corporations that have raw materials coming in and product going out. You've got businesses on the outside, like I think of Linoform, that may start their routes at 3 in the morning. So if the construction is changing or there's not a lot of street lighting, they need to be able to navigate in and out, plus the residents. So you have apartment buildings, you have AMHA housing, you've got single-family homes. So this is a very long stretch. So we had also planned to hand deliver letters to all businesses and residents along Worcester Road tomorrow. The construction company put up the sign last week. That was posted on social media. Then it was posted, what ODOT posted on their website. And what ODOT, you get $8 million for a project, you give up some control. So we were not informed that they were posting anything on their website. So that was posted on social media via their website. We did not know about that. We are meeting with them. We'd like to get updates every week. Where are you at? If it's no change, at least we know, right? Because you guys are going to get calls, we're going to get calls, you guys are going to be calling us, all of that. So making sure that this project goes off as best as possible and continues to not impact the businesses and the residents as much as possible. Obviously, the side streets are going to be open, and I've already got complaints about people who live on the side streets. We'll increase traffic on the side streets. 16th Street, if you're aware of that, that's a very odd street because it's very, very wide. It was built for truck traffic. It's not used for truck traffic these days, so the residents that live there today don't want truck traffic on there, and I understand it's a residential neighborhood. So you talk to some old timers, that's why it was built there, that wide, to handle truck traffic. So we've got, like I said, multitude of size of businesses with different needs. This is a needed project, total reconstruction. We're not used to that here in Barberton. We've only had a few streets reconstructed over the last few years. So we will stay in touch with council. Please let us communicate with us with any questions, and obviously we'll do the same with you. I anticipate weekly updates, even if it's us getting up here saying there are no updates. At least you guys know where we stand at Monday at 6, 7 o'clock, right? So we'll make sure that line of communication is both ways. As I mentioned when I first got up, we will be hand delivering letters about the project to all residents and businesses along Worcester Road. Okay.
I have a
Thank you.
question about
Yep.
that letter. What exactly is in that letter? You said about the project, but is it timelines or?
I have to go back, off the top of my head, I don't recall how in-depth it goes. But I'd have to.
Could we get a copy of it, like
Yeah.
emailed?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Anything else for miscellaneous? Anything from
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Hardy?
Thank you, Chair. We're getting more of those solar speed lights, aren't we?
Yes.
Do
I
we
think-
have a list of where they're going to be placed?
We're still discussing that. There's a few places I'd like to put them, but we're still discussing that.
What is a solar speed light?
The ones that have the speed limit and it's a radar that,
Like
Okay,
on
okay,
Hopkinton?
Gotcha, gotcha.
like, what do we get, 7 more?
6 more.
6 more.
Very good,
Yeah.
very good. Okay.
Thanks for reminding me on that one. Anything else from my committee, from the body, from the gallery? Got to get a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
We are adjourned at 6:15 PM.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Next up is Rules, Marketing, and Development with Ms. Gerhart.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'd like to bring the Rules, Marketing, and Development Committee to order. It's Monday, May 13th, 2024, and the time is 6:15 PM. We are in council chambers, and all members of my committee are present, including myself as chair, Mrs. Beck, Mr. Heidick, and President Greer, all other council members, and others as noted on my sheet. I have no new requests or pending requests for legislation at this time. Briefly, for miscellaneous discussion, I would like to bring up the council rules. This is in all of your purple binders that you were given back in December. We all probably read through these. I guess if you're a veteran council member a long time ago, or if you're newer, you probably read it recently, but if you guys would be willing to go back and read it now that you've been on council for a few months. And we are looking for anything that needs to be added or taken out or changed or updated. We also have no time frame for this, so we can have this discussion every time I have committee if we want, if there's nothing else happening. I'm going to share a few that have already been submitted, and then I'm also going to email these out so that you guys can be thinking about them and come back with conversation. Possibly getting into outlining the process for liquor license objections, since we've now had a couple of those and it's kind of loose right now. We want to make sure that we get in our rules that live streaming our meetings is mandatory. Make sure that all the committees are current and correct, and that the council members are properly assigned. Make sure we haven't missed anything. Review the description of the council committees, make sure all are accurate and correct. There are a few outdated. And then look at, we have decorum right now for people on council, but possibly extending that for council chambers. And I think that's all that I have for the list right now. We can talk about it, or like I said, it's just kind of for discussion over the next few months. So, are there any other topics for miscellaneous discussion from my committee? From the body? From the gallery? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. And we are adjourned at 6:18 PM.
Thank you, Ms. Gerhart.
You're welcome.
Next up is City Utilities with Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. City Utilities, the time is 6:19. I would like to call this meeting to order. Today, May 13th, we are in council chambers. All members of my committee are present, myself as chair, Jennifer Hager, Emily Beck, Justin Greer, and all others as noted. We have no new legislation to call for tonight, but we do have pending legislation that we will be voting on tonight. Resolution number 38-2024, a resolution opposing Dominion energy rate increase of 30%. We'll be voting on that tonight. Do we have any miscellaneous discussion from the council or from the gallery? for city utilities? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Hager. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We are adjourned at 6:20. With that, I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Last but not least, Finance and Personnel, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to bring the Finance and Personnel Committee to order. It is Monday, May 13th, 2024, 6:20 PM here in Council Chambers. All members of my committee are present, which includes myself as chair, Mr. Heidick, Mr. Griffin, and Mr. Greer. All other council members are also present, as well as guests as noted on my sheet. We have no new requests for legislation, as those are reserved for committee of the whole evenings. And we did have presentation and approval of the finance report for April. However, I do not see Mr. Flaker here, so we will do that next week. We have several pieces of legislation that we'll be voting on this evening. The first being ordinance number 39-2024, Appropriation Law Department. Are there any questions, comments about this one? Next up, we have ordinance 40-2024, title Enter into Contract with Medical Mutual. Any remarks? Okay, ordinance 41-2024, Appropriation Planning Department. This is for the CDBG fund. Any remarks? Okay. Next up, ordinance 42-2024, title Shannon Davis Compensation. Any remarks? Okay, ordinance 43-2024, title Lease Purchase Agreement with Huntington National Bank. Any remarks? Ordinance 44-2024, Appropriation Engineering Department for the Stormwater Capital Budget. Any comments, remarks, questions? You guys are making this easy on me. And then finally, we have ordinance 45-2024, enter into contract medical mutual for January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2025. Are there any remarks? All right. We have no appointments at this time, and I will open this up for miscellaneous discussion. Anybody? Anything at all?
Can you believe it?
Anything from the gallery for finance? Wow. Hearing none, can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
I will second that.
All right, we are adjourned at 6:23. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That concludes our individual committee meetings this evening. I don't really want to take a break, but I just need like a minute to clarify something before we start, and we'll begin our regular legislative meeting. Yeah.
Are you going to this?
We good? All right. All right, we're going to begin. Today's Monday, May 13th, 2024. This is a regular legislative meeting of Barberton City Council. I call this meeting to order at 6:25 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by invocation by Mrs. Hager. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear Heavenly Father, as we gather this evening, we ask your blessings upon our decisions, make them righteous, and keep our minds ever mindful of who we are making these decisions for. Please keep our military and our first responders in your prayers. Keep them safe and keep the families of the fallen police officers. Keep their families in your loving arms and guide them through these hard days ahead. In your name we ask this. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mrs. Hager. You're not going crazy. We're not crazy. Yeah, clerk, please call the roll.
President Greer.
Present.
Mr. Heidick.
Here.
Mrs. Thompson.
Here.
Mrs. Hager.
Here.
Mr. Cheatham.
Here.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mrs. Beck.
Here.
Ms. Gerhart.
Here.
Mr. Harris.
Here. All right, approval of the minutes. Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, April 29th, 2024. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting from Monday, April 29th, 2024.
Thank you. And Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting from Monday, April 29, 2024.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and seconded by Mrs. Thompson to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, April 29th, 2024 as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. Opposed? All right. Minutes are adopted. Petitions and claims.
There are none.
Matters requested.
They have all been dispersed.
Citizens addressing council. There are none. First reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Resolution number 38-2024 presented by Mr. Griffin. Title, Dominion Energy Ohio proposed 30% rate increase. A resolution opposing Dominion Energy Ohio's proposed 30% rate increase and requesting that the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio deny Dominion Energy Ohio's request for the same and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend. Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Hager?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mr. Griffin's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Griffin and seconded by Mrs. Hager to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt. Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 38-2024.
Thank you. And Mrs. Hager?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mr. Griffin's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Griffin and seconded by Mrs. Hager to adopt resolution number 38-2024. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 39-2024 presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Appropriation, Law Department. An ordinance appropriating $20,000 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the law department's operation and maintenance budget and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Thompson's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and second by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Hager?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Beck?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart?
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt. Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 39-2024.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and second by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 39-2024. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Ms. Gerhart?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Beck?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mrs. Hager?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 40-2024, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, enter into contract medical mutual. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to approve the renewal contract with Med Mutual Life for group life insurance from January 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2024, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Thompson's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Beck?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Hager?
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt. Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 40-2024.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 40-2024. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham?
Yes.
Mrs. Hager?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Beck?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 41-2024, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Appropriation Planning Department. An ordinance appropriating $129,000 from the unappropriated line item of the CDBG fund to the Planning Department's budget of the CDBG fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Thompson's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mrs. Hager?
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. Beck?
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 41-2024.
Thank you. Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 41-2024. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Beck?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham?
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart?
Yes.
Mrs. Hager?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 42-2024, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Shannon Davis Compensation. An ordinance authorizing the city of Barberton to place Shannon Davis, Police Information Specialist, at pay grade 3, step 9, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Thompson's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and second by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 42-2024.
Thank you, and Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and second by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 42-2024. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 43-2024, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Lease Purchase Agreement, Huntington National Bank. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Finance to execute and deliver a lease purchase agreement with Huntington National Bank and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, and Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Thompson's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and second by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 43-2024.
And Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and second by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 43-2024. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Ordinance number 44-2024, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Appropriation Engineering Department. An ordinance appropriating $274,725 from the unappropriated item of the Stormwater Fund to the Stormwater Capital Budget and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Thompson's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and second by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 44-2024.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and second by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 44-2024. Are there any remarks?
Okay. Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Motion for adoption carries.
Okay. Ordinance number 45-2024, presented by Mrs. Thompson. Title, Enter into Contract Medical Mutual. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to approve the renewed renewal contract with Med Mutual Life for group life insurance from January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2025, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend. Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second Counselor Thompson's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Motion for suspension carries. Motion to adopt. Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 45-2024.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Thompson and seconded by Mr. Heidick to adopt ordinance number 45-2024. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Motion to adopt carries.
This ends the first reading.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
We have none.
Third reading of ordinances and resolutions.
We have none.
Appointments.
We have none.
Miscellaneous and unfinished business. Is there anything from the body? Ms. Beck?
I just wanted to let everybody know, next month for the second Saturday is going to be the downtown Arts and Music, Magic City Arts and Music Festival. We are in need of volunteers for that. So if anybody's interested in signing up for a volunteer position, you can, standing at each stage, or there's lots of things you can do. Go on to Main Street Barberton's website and sign up for a slot for that. If you guys aren't sure about what that is, basically think of porch rocker that like Akron has on a much smaller scale. We want this to get bigger, bigger, bigger. So it's exactly like porch rocker. So please mark your calendars for June 8th. That's the second Saturday. Starts at noon, goes till 7. There's a lot of different bands, not just rock bands. There's like all kinds of bands. So excited about it. There's also lots of art installations and things like that. So, but really the point of this is please sign up to be a volunteer. Thank you.
Ms. Beck, where do they go sign up?
Oh, the Main Street
Main Street website?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Is there anything else from council? Anything, is there anything from department heads? Mr. Tiedecke.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did want to bring up again a couple detours that are coming up. We spoke of one earlier today on Worcester Road West. That'll be set up May 20th and for a duration through fall of 2025, keeping westbound traffic open. Eastbound will be detoured. I did want to point out that, businesses, you will be able to get to work Monday morning, spend a little bit extra time because the traffic patterns will be different. And as construction gets set up, it's a friendly reminder to everybody to, obey the traffic. There's workers out there. Obey the signs. Last week we had an incident where somebody didn't like one of the road closed signs and moved it over on Wunderlich. Don't know why. They moved it out of the way, and we had to get the contractor quickly back out there to close the road again and get things shut back down. So just a friendly reminder to everybody, please don't do that. Just got an update a little bit before council, the state Worcester project. They'll be moving on, weather permitting, May 28th to the next phase of that construction. So this is one that'll be a little more impactful. They'll be closing at the intersection. Northbound traffic will be closed. Right now, every leg of that intersection has two-way traffic, and and turning movements are pretty much open through that. For 30 days, that will be closed. So there's detours will be posted and set up for that. So just that northbound will be closed. Southbound will still have one lane, headed into the intersection where work is going to be paved by then, where they're doing work right now on the west side. And then South Van Buren, they base limestone, the crushed aggregate is in place all the way from Snyder down to Russell. Hopefully that minimizes a lot of the mud that's been generated throughout that. All the pipes in the ground. You're going to see a big machine out here real soon putting the rest of the base in from Russell all the way south to Eastern Road. That should be happening this week or next week. And contractors working, making space for the utility companies. There's a whole line of poles that'll be shifted for the new curbing. And new curbing should be starting here in the next week or two also, which as soon as that's on, the pavement starts going in up near Snyder. So that's a quick update.
Mr. Tedecki, real quick, since you mentioned State and Worcester, is there any way that we can put some sort of light on the bridge just to brighten it up? There's no street lights and it's very dark, and with the change in the traffic flow there, pretty dangerous. I mean, I know that the cones are reflective, but do you think that?
I'll look into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's my ward. My husband drives that every morning, and he leaves at like sometimes 4:30 in the morning, and it's crazy then because of the traffic with the bridge and everything.
Okay, I'll look into that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tedecki. Is there anything else from department heads? Chief, how's things going at the fire department? You doing all right back there?
We're doing fine.
All right.
He's awfully quiet.
You're always
I figured I'd make you say
Quiet all
something. No. All right, with nothing from I don't have anything. Actually, I do just want to mention, this is not really for a note, but just for this meeting, that we do have an executive session directly following the communication from the mayor. And just want to reiterate, when we do call on this, when we ask for people to leave, that there is no business after the executive session. So there is nothing that is being missed out. Communication from the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Following the safety director, this week is National Police Week, with honoring those who protect us. As she mentioned, please keep the Euclid officer, Jacob Durbin, who gave his life serving the Euclid community, and the officer in Columbus who was shot in the line of duty. Please keep them in your prayers. Change for Change is on Friday, May 31st at the VFW, benefiting the Magical Theater Company. Also, I'll again reiterate that the International Welcome Center works with refugees, which are not illegals. They are not immigrants. The refugees are part of a federal program where they are invited to the U.S., they are flown here, they don't walk here. All refugees have been vetted and are documented. The Trushin Farm housing project is not in conjunction with the International Welcome Center. Homes are not being built for refugees there, so I saw that on social media. Construction projects, we've heard the updates on South Van Buren, Worcester Road North, and Worcester Road West. These projects are vital to the movement of the community. And we realize that with infrastructure progress, there is inconvenience. So we'll be doing everything we can to help promote the businesses in those areas. On the other side, Snyder Stream Oxbow Wetland Stream Restoration and Flood Mitigation Project is underway. You may have seen that down off of Snyder Avenue. Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District awarded $345,000 for this project, which includes the engineering and the construction. This is both a water quantity and a water quality project, which will add an additional 240 linear feet of stream channel, which will be constructed, which doubles that length there. So what does that mean? It provides roughly the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool for stormwater mitigation. So that's about 2 acres. So that goes before it hits the inlet at Lamberton, or First Street, excuse me, and then goes into our system. So that'll hold back quite a bit of water. Barberton Business through the schools. Barberton Business Advisory Committee Council was awarded a 3-star recognition from the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. they were the only one in Summit County to receive this honor. So they've been doing a great job. We're a part of that, and things have been going very, very well. With that, the advanced manufacturing and cybersecurity programs, you've heard highlighted the $1.4 million in grant dollars that they received. This was applied for by Mr. Hodenbosey, who unfortunately passed away just a few days prior to the notice of that award. That's all I have on my updates. Any questions? Yes.
This might be a long shot here, but a few years back, we tried to do stuff with the Muskegon watershed on trying to alleviate trenching some of the flooding. And I see we're working with them on this. Is there any possibility that we can look back into that collaboration with them? I know there was tension, or not tension, but some holdups with that whole project. And I know they were in the center of it. So.
Yeah, I want to say that with this existing project that we had applied for funding through them the other year and did not receive any. Kind of went back, talked to them. We always, whenever we don't get a grant, we try to go back if they allow and ask them why we didn't. How can we better our application? So we had that meeting, we reapplied, we were able to get the award of $345,000. So the foot's in the door, we're working with them. Hopefully more good things to come in the future. So.
Thank you, Mayor.
Anything else? Yes.
I believe last week, Councilman Heidick asked you about the progress of the Tusk Avenue, the new city building, and the grant amount. Do you have that?
Yes, so, thanks. So we applied for originally $750,000, and that would be for technology cabling for the police department. They asked us to double that, so that's what we did. So that's kind of working us through the process. So 1.5 million.
Thank you.
Yep. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, this is typically the way we would end our regular legislative meeting, but we do have an executive session that was requested by Lisa O'Call-Schmiller, our law director, to enter into an executive session to consider pending or imminent court action. Having stated the request, I'll entertain a motion to enter into executive session of council. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to enter into executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's motion that we enter into executive session.
Thank you. It was moved by Mr. Heidick and second by Mrs. Thompson to enter into an executive session to consider matters required to be kept confidential. Clerk, please call the roll. Sorry.
President Greer. Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hager. Yes. Mr. Cheatham.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Beck.
Yes.
Ms. Gerhart.
Yes.
Mr. Harris.
Yes.
All right. We are now in executive session at